Hello, everyone. Welcome to this session. We have two amazing presenters today. Let me introduce Justin Joseph Badion. He is a cultural studies scholar and theologian whose work examines the intersections between religion, pedagogy, and culture. He is assistant professor at the Department of Theology, School of Humanity, Ateneo de Manila University. It's a Jesuit institution in the Philippines where he also serves as the School of Humanities coordinator for research and creative work. His current research brings together contextual theology, cultural studies, and critical post-humanities with particular attention to Philippine and Asian contexts, artificial intelligence, popular media, fandom studies, and questions of formation and social change. We're excited to hear from you. Please, the floor is yours.
Hello, I'll share my screen now. Hello everyone, I'm Justin. My paper is entitled The Pedagogy of the Piging, Reimagining the Vocation of the Religious Educator in the Feast of Learning. So, in this paper, I use the Filipino idea of piging or banquet as a metaphoric heuristic for reimagining the vocation of the Catholic religious educator. So, because this is only a short presentation, I will not be able to discuss the whole paper in full. Instead, I'll focus on the basic movement of my argument. I'll begin with some background and positionality. I'll introduce the notion of piging and what it offers as a metaphor for learning. And third, I'll look at how it allows us to think of the religious educator in three ways as cook to other cooks, table fellow to the feast goers, and host to guests. And finally, I'll end with questions for discussion. The question of vocation feels especially urgent in our present moment. Yesterday, in the presidential reflections of our REA president, Karen Marie Eust, we were invited to reflect on the gospel inspired questions: who do they say we are? And who do we say we are? And the aspirational, who do you want to be? I see this presentation as one small contribution to that larger reflection. It asks, who is the religious educator? What are we called to do? What kind of presence do we bring to our students, our institutions, churches, and our publics? I speak from a distinctly Catholic and Filipino religious education perspective. At the same time, I hope that the image of the piging, the banquet, may offer some nourishment for those working in other traditions and contexts, and that this metaphor can help us reconsider religious education not simply as instruction or transmission, but as a practice of shared nourishing, accompaniment, and hospitality. So let me begin with the image of the piging. For those of you who may not be familiar with Filipino culture, piging may be translated as a banquet or feast. But I want to clarify that not every act of eating together is automatically a piging. In Filipino context, we have broader words such as salo-salo or kainan, which may refer more generally to communal dining of varying forms. A piging, however, carries a more particular resonance. It refers to a feast intentionally prepared and shared within a community. Birthdays, fiestas, weddings, Christmas gatherings, graduations, and other communal occasions can all become reason for piging. This is why I find the piging such a generative image for religious education. The piging helps us reimagine religious education beyond the image of just instruction. It allows us to think of teaching and learning as a shared practice of nourishing and also hospitality. So, two particular scholars' work helped me shape this reflection on the Feast of Learning. As you can see in my paper, I drew from Monique van Dyke Gronibor, whose work on the vocation of the religious educator attends to different levels of vocation: the micro level of biography and personal formation, the meso level of profession and pedagogical practice, and the macro level of social and cultural context. At the same time, I also drew from Angel Mendez Montoya, uh, whose work in alimentary theology helps us think theologically through food. and from whom I got the images of cook, uh, table fellow, and hosts. But in his work, they were applied to roles for the theologian. So, what I try to do in this paper is bring these frameworks into conversation through the image of the piging. I propose, therefore, three roles for the religious educator. First, as cook with and two other cooks. Second, as table fellow to those who partake in the feast. And third, as host to guests in spaces of learning, dialogue, and participation. So the first role that I propose is the religious educator as cook with and two other cooks. We start at the micro level, the level of biography, identity, and personal formation. In the Philippine context, personal formation cannot be reduced to individual self development or self mastery. The Filipino notion of kapwa reminds us that self is always formed in relation. So, kapwa is the Filipino word that translates to other or fellow person, but it's more deeply understood as shared self. So the other is not simply outside me, the other participates in the formation of who I am. That's why formation, especially formation of the religious educator, is never solitary. One does not become a religious educator alone. One becomes a religious educator through others, with others, and for others. In the language of the Piging, formation resembles learning how to cook within a shared culinary tradition. If pedagogy is a feast, then pedagogical principles are like recipes. We inherit them from those who came before us and also share them with those among us whom we have a common vocation. But we never follow these recipes mechanically because ingredients change, context shift, local tastes emerge. A good cook preserves, adapts, and improvises responsibly, often together with others. To become a better cook is not only to master recipes, but it is to learn people. It is to know what nourishes, what flavors are missing, what must be prepared with more tenderness. For this reason, vocation requires more than professional competence, it also requires gusto. This word is interesting because it carries double resonance. In the usual sense that it's used in English, gusto suggests enthusiasm, vitality, and style. It's interesting that it shares the same root as the word gustatory, which refers to things that relate to the sense of taste, the act of eating. In the Filipino language, gusto is a noun or verb meaning desire or longing. To have gusto is to be moved by appetite, by yearning, by a kind of eros. The vocation of the religious educator is sustained not simply by obligation or institutional duty, but a desire for the feast itself, the flourishing of learners, communities, traditions, and ultimately life in and with God. So to be a cook with and two other cooks in the feast of learning is to commit oneself to ongoing self-cultivation. In Ignatian language, as someone teaching in a Jesuit university, this may be understood for me as part of the movement of magis, the search for the more. Formation is an ongoing task of being drawn to the more. In the same way, religious educators participate in a living tradition, receive wisdom, but also contribute to it through teaching, writing, research, and collaboration. The point is to help nourish other cooks together as yourself who are also laboring at the feast of learning. The second role I want to propose is as table fellow to partakers of the feast. And here I draw from the meso level of vocation. What am I doing as religious educator? To think about this, I draw from a distinction made by Thomas Groome. Religious education may involve teaching about a religion, teaching from a religion, and in catechetical context, teaching people to become a religion. This matters because learners do not all arrive at the feast in the same way. Some may already be familiar with the dishes being served. They know the flavors, the stories, the gestures, the prayers, and the memories attached to the meal. Others may be encountering these dishes for the first time. Some may be curious, others hesitant. In a religious education classroom, this means that students come with varying degrees of familiarity, trust, resistance, hunger, and exhaustion. The image of the piging reminds us that pedagogy cannot assume one appetite, one pace, or one mode of nourishment. A good cook considers who will eat, their preferences, restrictions, histories, allergies, and needs. In the same way, the religious educator cannot presume a one size fits all, or perhaps better, one meal fits all model of learning. The feast must be prepared with attentiveness to those who will partake of it. This is especially important in educational systems like in the Philippines, where increasingly these systems are being shaped by efficiency, standardization, and measurable outputs. When education follows the logic of fast food, learning becomes uniform, scalable, easy to consume, information is packaged for easy delivery, and students are expected to receive it quickly as well. But the character of the Piging offers a different pedagogical imagination. This distinct feast invites people to linger. It creates space for conversation, for questioning, listening, laughter, disagreement, and relationship. The participatory dimension is especially visible in the Filipino practice of kwentuhan, the sharing of stories that often accompanies communal eating. At a Piging, nourishment does not come only from the food, it also comes from conversation. People tell stories, and it's not just a one direction, unidirectional sort of telling of stories. They negotiate relationships, they share grief, humor, gossip, advice, and wisdom. In the Filipino context, kwentuhan is one of the ways in which our fabric of relationships, of kapwa or other, are woven and rewoven. Religious education can learn from this. The classroom too can become a site of shared stories or kwentuhan. Students are not passive consumers of doctrine or information. They bring their own stories and questions, often bearing some baggage or struggle with it. They speak from their own locations, they listen to others, they test inherited meanings against lived experience. In such a classroom, the educator remains responsible for guiding the learning, but does not stand outside the feast as a detached distributor of content. I think that's why the piging is also a question of authority. At the traditional piging, someone must sit at the cabecera, the head of the table. This image helps us think about the authority of the religious educator. The educator may have a place of responsibility, leadership, and expertise, but it should not end up as a situation of harmful authoritarianism. The religious educator cannot confuse knowledge with control. The feast of learning must not become forced feeding. At the same time, the metaphor of feast must be examined critically. Not every table is automatically hospitable. Feasts can also reproduce hierarchy. Some people sit at the privileged places, like the head of the table, the cabecera. Some voices dominate the conversation. Some tastes are treated as refined, while others are dismissed. Some guests are warmly welcomed, while others are made to feel like outsiders. This is why I find Filipino national hero Jose Rizal's novel, Noli Me Tangere, useful to remember. The feast hosted by Captain Tiago in the opening chapter entitled Ang Piging, the banquet, gathers people around one table, but it also reveals the inequalities of colonial society. Beneath the appearance of hospitality, one sees deference, exclusion, and power, especially in relation to Padre Damaso, the Spanish born Franciscan friar whose insistence of his superiority over the colonized people is apparent here and throughout the novel. The table becomes a place where hierarchy is performed. The third role I propose is the religious educator as host to guests. It corresponds to the macro level of vocation, the wider context in which religious education takes place. This includes the institutions we work in, the church we belong to, the country we live in, and the world in which we must respond. To be a host, then, is not simply to welcome people into a classroom, it's to take responsibility for the conditions that make genuine encounter possible. A host prepares space, attends to guests, mediates relationships, and notices who has been excluded from the table. Filipino hospitality is often celebrated for its warmth, generosity, and openness, but hospitality can also be distorted. It can become excessive accommodation, self-erasure, patronage, or performance. Even feasts can reproduce inequality, debt, and exclusion. Um, which brings me to the final Filipino practice that I find especially meaningful. It's called pabaon, or you can uh, call it takeaway. At the end of many Filipino feasts, guests are sent home with food to carry with them. The nourishment of the feast does not end at the table. So, religious education should work in a similar way. The goal is not only that students participate well in the classroom, the hope is that they leave with something to carry: a question, a practice, a story, a memory, a form of discernment, a taste for justice, a renewed sense of God, or a deeper responsibility for others. Learners are formed not only to receive nourishment, but to help prepare more just, hospitable, and life giving tables in the world beyond the classroom. So maybe I'll end with some questions for discernment. What images or metaphors from your own cultural or religious context help you rethink the vocation of the religious educator? How do we prepare a feast of learning without assuming that all learners have the same hunger, background, uh, relationship to religion? What forms of hierarchy still shape our classrooms, institutions, churches, or learning spaces? And what kinds of pabaon or takeaway should religious education send learners with today? So thank you very much for listening. That's the end of my presentation.
Thank you, Justin. Thank you for this amazing presentation. Why don't we give a hand to Justin? Um, does anyone has a clarification questions that you want to ask now before we go to Eunjin? Like I said in the beginning, we will have a discussion time after we hear from Eunjin. But if you have any like pressing clarification questions, um, I don't see any hands, so I will introduce Eunjin. Eunjin Jun is a PhD candidate in the joint doctoral program in the study of religion at the University of Denver and Iliff School of Theology, with a focus on practical theology and religious education. Her interdisciplinary research explores the intersections of faith, media culture, embodiment, and identity formation, with particular attention to Christian emerging adult women's engagement with K-pop as a site where beauty, belonging, faith, and the body are negotiated. So, Eunjin, we welcome you. The floor is yours.
Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everyone joining from around the world. I'm gonna share my screen first. I am honored to present my paper titled Aesthetic Spiritual Formation, Reclaiming the Imago Day in the Visual Landscape of K-pop. This paper grew out of the theoretical work of my doctoral dissertation, especially my exploration of beauty within visual culture. I begin to ask not only what K-pop does to young women, but what religious education must do in a media-saturated age. So using K-pop as a case study, this paper asks how religious education might teach learners to see differently. I want to begin with the motivations for this research. We live in an image-saturated age. Social media feeds, streaming platforms, advertising billboards, beauty tutorials, and influential cultures now form the visual atmosphere of everyday life, particularly for digital natives, particularly also like for young women. These images do more than surround us. They instruct us. They teach viewers what beauty should look like. They teach which bodies are worthy of admirations. They also teach which bodies are inadequate, excessive, undesirable, or unworthy of attention. This is why I argue that visual culture is not simply something young women consume, it is something that forms them. Formation does not wait for consent. Long before a young woman can clearly say what she believes about her own body, visual culture has already been teaching her what beauty should look like, what kinds of body is desirable, and what it feels like to live in a body that seems to fall short. My central argument is that aesthetic spiritual formation is a necessary and under-theorized task of religious education in a media-saturated age. Taking K-pop as a case study, my paper examines how dominant beauty norms displace the theological vision of the embodied dignity. I ask how religious education might cultivate another way of seeing. The underlying question of this paper is, how might religious education teach young women not only what to believe about their bodies, but how to see their bodies truthfully, tenderly, and theologically? To engage in this question, I turn to both theoretical and theological understanding of beauty in the section of the seeing as formation. I draw on philosophical and cultural accounts of beauty, but also ask what beauty means theologically. I explain seeing as formation in the two movements. First, I describe the human being as aesthetic creatures in the section of the aesthetic creatures, beauty, perception, and human formation. We do not encounter the world only through ideas or beliefs. We are also shaped through perception, sensation, desire, and feeling. Drawing on Ellen Tissanak-Yake, David Morgan, and Bridget Meyer, I understand aesthetic life as basic to human meaning making. Seeing is embodied and shaped by memory, desire, fear, longing, and repeat practice. Images do not simply appear before us. Over time, they train perception. So my central claim is that seeing is never neutral. Seeing is form, and seeing forms us. And second, I turn to the beauty and the image of God. Here, beauty belongs first to God and to goodness of creation. Drawing on David White and Lakeisha Lockhart, I argue that Imago Dei offers a relational account of embodied dignity. So these sections move from the fundamental claim about human formation to a theological claim about beauty. We are formed by how we see, and Christian religious education must help us ask what kinds of seeing lead us toward the dignity of the creaturely life before God. To see theologically is to recognize that embodied goodness is not achieved, it is the gift already given. Yet, this vision is often displaced by visual cultures, and K-pop offers one vivid site where we can see that displacement at work. Before naming the displacement, I want to be clear, K-pop is not simply a site of harm. For many young women, K-pop is a world of joy, belonging, creativity, and delight. It offers music and dance, friendship and fandom, emotional connection, and community. As you can see that the pictures, K-pop demon hunters hits around the world, and also like BTS speech in the like UN, also like many Korean young women trying to do democratic movements in the South Korea by using the light stick. So my point is that this is a matter because young people do not merely consume popular cultures. As Storymaker reminds us, they inhabit it. They use it to make meaning and to imagine who they are becoming. So my point is not that K-pop is simply dangerous or should be rejected. Rather, K-pop matters theologically because it is meaningful. Its formative power is strong precisely because it is pleasurable, beautiful, effective, and communal. However, and I wanted to more focusing on the K-pop idols and beauty cultures. K-pop does not simply display beauty, it narrates beauty and repeats beauty and connects beauty to performance discipline, admirations, desire, and success. Through music video, choreography, and fan edits, social media images, styling, makeup, and idol culture, K-pop becomes a powerful visual pedagogist. It teaches viewers how to see bodies, including their own. In this section, I named three aesthetic displacements through which K-pop beauty cultures can reshape the theological meaning of beauty and the body. Three aesthetic displacements. First one, the bodily perfection. Second one, body as achievement. Third one, beauty as individual choice. Bodily perfection. First, beauty is narrowed into bodily perfection. K-pop often circulates a specific visual idols, double eyelids, a small face, a V-shaped jawline, luminous skin, and slim yet toned body. These features are not universal beauty norms, yet through repetition, performance, and global circulations, they begin to feel aspirational and even nature. Structural help us see that images do not merely reflect beauty, they produce meaning around it. Mervan Karadik, a cultural theorist, help us see how these beauty norms travel globally through desire rather than force. So beauty becomes displaced. It is no longer received as a gift. It becomes an impossible standard that young women are embodied to pursue. Second, body as a radical achievement. The body is reframed as achievement. In K-pop visual culture, the idol body is rarely presented as extension. It is connected to training, dieting, skincare, styling, cosmetic procedures, and even plastic surgeries and constant self-management. Beauty becomes proof of effort. The body is not simply shown as beautiful. It is shown as something that can be achieved through discipline. Either workout routines, diet plans, skincare, 10-step skincare routines, and transformation videos all reinforce that idea that body is a project. This matters theologically because the body shifts from the side of the received dignity to a side of ongoing achievement. The gap between young women's body and the body on the screen no longer feels connected to structure first, gender's expectations, racialized beauty norms, or consumer capitalism. It begins to feel like their personal failure. And third, beauty is as individual choice. Third, the beauty is reframed as individual choice. Hill and Olga's concept of the confidence cultures helps clarify these dynamics. Contemporary beauty cultures does not only tell women they are inadequate, it often speaks in the language of the empowerment. Love your body, choose yourself, be confident, be the best version of you. These messages can feel liberating, and sometimes they are, but they can also hide the structures that decide which bodies are more easily recognized as beautiful in the first place. When beauty is framed mainly as a personal choice, structural norms do not disappear, they become invisible. And when those structures become invisible, the burden falls on the individual body. If I do not feel beautiful, confident, or desirable, then the failure appears to be mine. For Christian young women, this can become even more complicated when beauty norms are entangled with spiritual expectations, such as be modest but attractive, humble but well presented, confident but not vain. Here, beauty culture and faith language can sound surprisingly similar, but one declares worth as gift, the other demands as achievement. Together, these displacements form interlocking structures through which the theological meaning of beauty is quietly displaced. So the question becomes, what might religious education recover? In response to these three displacements, I propose three movements of aesthetic spiritual formation: already beautiful, scaffolding, beholding together. The first movement is already beautiful. Embody dignity as a received reality. This movement challenges beauty as standards. Before religious education can help young women resist distorted beauty norms, it must offer a theological declaration: we are already beautiful, and we are already beautiful. Beauty culture trains young women to experience distance from the idol as a deficit, but the Imago Day points in the opposite directions. It calls us to recognize what is uniquely and irreplaceably given in these bodies, this faith, this history, and this particular life before God. This does not mean appearance does not matter. It does not shame young women for enjoying fashion, style, skincare, dance, or visual beauty. Rather, it refutes the lie that the body must first become beautiful in order to become worthy. Second one, the second movement is the scales falling, the renewal of perception. This movement interrupts the body as achievement. The habits through which young women learn to see their bodies are not only intellectuals, they're bodily, affective, and repeated. They're observed through images, comments, comparison, and desires, but seeing can be relearned. Religious education can help young women ask, what taught me to see my bodies this way? Whose bodies are centered? Whose bodies are erased? When does admirations become self-erasure? When does aspirations become comparison? The scales do not fall through efforts alone, but they also do not fall without practice. They fall through discernment, lament, critique, and theological reorientation. The third movement is beholding together, learning to see in community. This movement resists the confidence as an individual obligation. No one learns to see differently alone. We learn to see in families, churches, peer groups, and fandom space and media platforms. And Hee-sung Wang's concept of madang, the open courtyard in Korean cultural life, offers a helpful image here. The madang is a space of gathering, storytelling, shared interpretation, lament, and celebration. It suggests a community that's centered on admirations of a standard, but on recognition of a gift. But fake communities do not automatically see bodies well. They can reproduce the very hierarchies they claim to resist. So beholding together is not just a comforting idea, it is a communal discipline. It asks whether our communities help young women see themselves and others through divine love, or whether we quietly train them to managing how they are seen. Let me conclude with the main claim. Aesthetic spiritual formation is not a rejection of beauty, but a reorientation of beauty. In our media-saturated age, religious education must help young women see their bodies not as failed projects, but as a site of divine dignity. Already beautiful, scaffolding, and beholding together name this work, receiving beauty as a gift, relearning how to see, and forming communities of a renewed sight. In a word that says, you are not yet enough, religious education can declare, you are already enough before the standard exists. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Eunjin. That was a great presentation. Thank you. So now it's time for discussions. The floor is open. If you have any questions or what you've thought, oh yeah, a lot of plots are going on. Any comments that you want to share, what spoke to you, you can share. You can also leave them on the chat. If you want to speak, you can also raise your hand. I'll call you, and yeah, so now the floor is open to everyone if you have any questions. Mary.
Thank you to both of you for some really wonderful and deeply thoughtful presentations. And my question is for both of you. I mean, both of you are talking about ways to, at least the way I hear you, inhabit religious education that is transformative and can be liberating. And I'm wondering, what are some of the ways you found to push back against the dominant stories? I mean, you've lifted up, especially Unjin, you've lifted up some of the more toxic forms of dominant story. But I know simply telling people they're toxic doesn't actually change the experience of them. So if maybe each of you could talk about what are some pragmatic ways that you help people push back against or resist the dominant stories.
Yes.
Unjin, do you want to go first or?
Thank you so much for asking this wonderful question. I think that's really important. I'm still working on the how to against the toxic, the story, the dominant story. But one thing now I'm thinking, engaging in the particular in the K-pop, that we need to more engage in the diverse like body shapes and also diverse body representation in not only for in the K-pop culture, but also in religious education association and also like landscape of the theological education as well. So without diverse stories through the diverse people, we cannot hold together. We cannot diverse together. So that's why I'm take away right now.
Maybe I can follow up. Yeah, thank you, Unjin. And Mary, thank you very much for that question. I think primarily in the Philippines, the dominant narrative for religious education is really this traditional confessional approach to teaching Catholic religious education. The Philippines is primarily a mostly Catholic country, and the way religious education is done in many of the Catholic schools, from primary school to tertiary education, is still very much uh, traditional instruction style. Students are seen as uh, deposits of knowledge, and it's very much the critique of Paulo Freire about the banking model. And I think that's really the dominant sort of structure that we're trying to resist against when it comes to religious education in the Philippines. So many of us scholars in the Philippines trying to look for different ways to reimagine what it means to be religious educator, not just simply because especially in the primary and secondary schools, there's a lot of fear from teachers of, oh, maybe we're not teaching the right doctrine, we're not teaching the right things to our students, and therefore when they're presented with challenging questions, questions about gender, questions about politics, often they shy away from answering that, and they end up answering very canned answers. So part of our sort of like crisis is a crisis of imagination, trying to think up of how we would be religious educator in the Philippines, knowing full well that uh, a lot of people in very powerful positions in the country went through Catholic education in the Philippines, and there's always this talk amongst Filipinos. Oh, it's because of the education that they had. They weren't taught well enough by their religious educator. So I think that's really the kind of narrative that we're trying to respond to in the Philippines.
Thank you. And Justin, I see your comment here to Unjin. Do you want to elaborate a little and then ask Unjin the question directly, or like the struggle that you have?
Yeah, Gus, thank you, Unjin, for sharing this very compelling presentation. I especially appreciated your point in your paper. I went through your paper a while ago, and in your presentation, you showcase how beauty is framed primarily as individual choice and achievement. And when it's framed that way within K-pop, the structural norms that decide which bodies are seen as beautiful become harder to recognize and critique. As someone who's a big fan of K-pop, I find myself often caught in the tension. Uh, I enjoy the music, performance, the fashion, and visual culture, but I'm also aware of how K-pop can intensify very narrow beauty standards. In the Philippines, which is one of the major markets of K-pop in Southeast Asia, I think we also see how these standards travel transnationally and begin to shape local imaginaries of beauty, desirability, discipline, and even self-worth. Actually, I have a question to follow up to that. Um, I'm worried that there's an impulse for aesthetic spiritual formation coming off as simply moralizing and pathologizing fandom or dismissing meaning that's found by idols and fans that they genuinely find in K-pop. So I'm just wondering how you will negotiate or work on uh, how do you respond to that? Because there are a lot of people who just say, "Oh, this is just this fanaticism is not good. It's all just as you mentioned in your presentation. It's all a sight of harm. A lot of people think that way."
Thank you so much for asking. I think now I'm working on my dissertation right now. So, but this paper is more focusing on the theoretical understanding of the K-pop and the beauty cultures. But now I'm interviewed and 17 people in the U.S. context, the young women. So I need to now is I'm working on the decoding all like interviews right now. But the one thing I found that I think that they are they always like say that the last, oh, it's not a harm for us. It is very enjoyable and the old things we really liked. And then, but still like there's some yeah, like part of the like harmful ways to sing. So that's why I wanted to see how to understand, but it's a quite the ambivalence of the beauty cultures. That's why I don't want it to say it's a really harm or good, more like ambivalence ways of the understanding of the beauty, particularly in the K-pop culture. So it's really hard to answer, right?
Paul left in the comments saying, I think it is great to see research that brings together body image and religious education. My wife is a social worker and tells me that eating disorders are particularly problematic in our region at the moment. She tried approaching our church recently to provide education to leadership on eating disorder awareness, but she was turned down. Body image issues need to be addressed in religious environments. So thank you for this contribution. Mary has left a comment saying there is a powerful dissertation about fandom and liberatory religious education from Garrett, and she is working on a Horizons proposal. So maybe it will become a book to look for papers. Yeah, yay. Montag Williams left a comment. Thank you both for your presentations. Justin, I'm looking forward to introducing students to your Madang metaphor, Eunjin. And Eunjin, your paper is incredibly moving and needed. Thank you. I personally find your discussion of aesthetic spiritual formation as especially helpful, and I'm also glad to hear that your method involves qualitative research.
I was just going to say that there's a lot of research in the wider educational field about the ways digital storytelling, helping people articulate their own stories with sort of an aspiration to future image, has given them some agency and proved to be somewhat transformative. And I think I love both of the ways you all are working with this stuff. And I think the more that we can help people voice their own stories in ways that are both connected to religious stories that are transformative, right? Like I think there's something about agency that we need to pay attention to because digital culture gives people a lot of room to have individual agency, sometimes very much consumer driven. But I don't, anyway, I want to lift up how do we move from what you're doing to very pragmatically helping people create stories that they want to live into.
Marius, do you want to share the a link to look at it, the digital storytelling websites if you have in specific?
Mary's muted, but I think she's like, yes, I'll do it soon.
Yeah, I need to find the link. I will do it. Sorry.
Yeah, in the meantime, um, Garamhan asked, thank you both for the great presentation. I wonder how Justin's Feast of Learning could become a safer space to discuss body image by collaborating with Eunjin's insight on the topic.
Yeah, I'd like to respond to that. So right now, I do teach in our university a food justice course that's drawn from theology and the social sciences. And one of the topics that's dealt with there is the question of nutrition. And one of the things that does pop up is when students ask about the concern about body image in relation to food and our connection and relationship to food. And uh, how I'd wish I could share a bit more about what the students did say. But in terms of like just in general, there's a tension that exists there that in primarily prior to me teaching that course, I had not expected to come up. Uh, I was just wanted to share like, oh, the general food systems concerns in the world, and then it does come up like, oh, they have questions about body image as well in relation to food. So thank you for bringing that up.
So when I was listening to the presentation, I thought like pegging the concept of feast and maybe that can happen in Madang, where Eunjin talked about. And I thought it was a very interesting point of view. And maybe it has like similar points because we share like I don't know, like an East Asian culture that's like very collaborative and doing it together. And I'm wondering what your thoughts are on that.
I'd say the Asian cultures that I'm aware of, East Asian and Southeast Asian, there's definitely should I say, uh, definite interest and focus on the centrality of food and feasting within culture, and also the communal aspect of uh, within society, like a more uh, communal oriented sort of perspective. So it is interesting, and I'd love to learn more about Madam from Engine and from others who have a bit more uh, familiarity with that concept. And but yeah, thank you, Ezra, for sharing.
So a question to Eunjin. Eunjin, does your qualitative work involve people from various global contexts? If so, can you share where is there a particular age group you're focusing on?
Yeah, actually, my qualitative work involves only in the young women who are um, living in the US because it's a doctoral research, so I cannot extended my participants in my dissertation work. But interestingly, I started this topic motivations from Indonesia. So I'm aware of the how understand the K-pop cultures, particularly in the post-colonial lens to transnational work. So the particular age group is 18 to 29. But not only for Korean, but also Korean American, but also like all like the the young women who are engaging in the K-pop culture and also like Christian, identify the Christian. So Justin, I have a question about your papers. So I like your discussion questions, but I missed that all. but I would like to know more about the Feast of Hunger. So you mentioned about the Feast of Hunger, and then you mentioned that how do religious educators gives the information or the share the contents together based on the for everyone, not only for like. Am I correct? I'm not sure,
Yes,
but
yes.
can you explain more about that?
So I think one of the things that is made to be seen within a feast setting is that it's not always just about uh, prosperity and celebration. There are many settings of feasting that end up revealing hierarchies and revealing situations of inequality. So in the Philippines, for example, in there are various situations where certain piging or certain situations of feasting became hot news topics because there were sites in which politicians showcased the ostentatious amount of money that they put into the feasting that they do. So, uh, for example, one of our former presidents was caught spending thousands and thousands of dollars on a feast shared between her and her family. I mean, like in terms of like just this became a huge headline topic, and uh, made people more aware of, oh, why are these people feasting? And so many people in the Philippines are going hungry because the Philippines is one of the very uh, precarious situations when it comes to food systems. Uh, so yeah, that's just an example of the criticality and reflexivity that I've had to wrestle with when I was doing my dissertation years ago. That was the basis for this particular paper. Is that there's feasting is not just about, oh, it's celebration, it's great, but there are moments wherein feasting can represent something like hunger vis-a-vis inequality. So yeah.
Thank you. We have
sorry.
one more. Oh, so go ahead. We have one more. We have time for one more question. So please
Okay,
go.
thank you so much. This has been so wonderful. I want to continue to explore this topic, and I particularly am very fascinated as I sit in the intersection. My grandfather's from Canton, China. And my family's from Africa, and we reside in Trinidad. So there's a lot of Catholicism, a lot of fat shaming, and a lot of uh, connection with overindulgence or being anti godly if you have big size like me. And so some of the work that I do is with misogynoir and fat phobia. So I want to pose a question, and either one of you can kind of shape it if you'd like. How can the Christian vision of the feast help us to resist the body shame and beauty standards that are often reinforced by the K-pop culture?
Mm.
And Jen, are you gonna go first, or
I can you say one more time?
uh,
Can you please repeat the question one more time?
Yes. So I'm kind of like culminating both topics, and with the idea of this vision for our Christian uh, a Christian vision of the feast, and we know that there's some complex things around the feast, but how does the Christian vision help us to resist body shame and the beauty standards that have been emphasized and reinforced by the K-pop culture. And I love K-pop culture, but it's fantasy for me because I'm 300 pounds and I don't know if I'll ever be 200. I don't know if I'll be 100. And I love God. Thank you.
Question. I cannot answer right now. I think maybe I'm reflecting on these questions more than while writing the dissertation. And
So I think like the Imago Day, like what how is the Imago Day manifested through this idea of feast, and how does this idea of feast resist some of the aesthetic emphasis from the K-pop culture, maybe, if that makes
It,
sense.
if I may, I can just share some thoughts as well.
Yeah.
I guess um, the area that I find to be a possible place from which we can gain some insight might be eschatology. There's a banquet at the end times in a way, and that is based on the symbol of the kingdom of God, the reign of God. And I think that the resurrected body that comes at
Mm.
the in the end of times comes to challenge maybe our notion of, oh, what does the resurrected body look like, and does that standard still kind of like fit with how we are in the earthly sense? Because in a way, the human kingdom and the reign of God, they they are distinct from one another, and I think that's where the Christian tradition can share a bit about, oh, maybe we should reconsider our notions of what a body perfected might be. So, well, that's just my take from my humble positionality wherever I am. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you both. Thank you for this amazing question, and thank you both for the presentation. Graham talked about a BTS concert that she saw last time, and she was in. It created an interesting, radical space for people of all ages, races, and genders to connect and feel united. And Montague Williams says, I think what's in important question can connect dots between Imago Dei dignity and notions of humanity as inherently communal. So yeah, thank you all for coming. We have reached the end of our time, unfortunately, but I paste announcements link to the chat. If you're interested, please check it out. Why don't we give a hand to our amazing presenters once again, and everyone who came and contributed and showed up to this presentation. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, and hopefully I'll see you around.